I used to think the sound of hospital floors' soft rubber soles against waxed linoleum was familiar enough to steady me. I walked them for years, not as a patient, not quite a staff, but in that in-between role of someone who signed things no one else could and remembered the names of people others forgot. That morning, I stood holding a small gray bear with satin ears and a tag that read, "For when you're not sure who you look like yet." The tag had seemed clever when I picked it out. The security guard was young, kind enough not to smile too much, but young enough that the silence stretched between us felt like something he was trying to fill. "I'm sorry, ma'am. We have a restricted list for the maternity wing today." He tilted the clipboard toward his chest like it might shield him. I didn't lean in. My daughter-in-law was very specific. "Immediate family only," I didn't correct him. "Could you call the room?" I asked. He nodded and turned slightly, already dialing. I watched his fingers, quick, polite, practiced. Someone had trained him well. He waited, then said something quiet into the phone. He glanced back at me once, not for confirmation, but almost as if he hoped I wouldn't be watching. Then he hung up. His shoulders softened. She said no visitors outside the approved list. "I'm really sorry. Maybe you could try again tomorrow." I looked at the clipboard as though my name might still appear if I stared long enough. Not forgotten, not miswritten, simply missing. I placed the bear gently on the desk between us. "Make sure it gets to the baby, if that's allowed." The guard nodded. "Of course, ma'am." I walked back through the corridor. There were no photographs of board members on these walls anymore. Years ago, there had been an older version of me standing between two founding donors. It had been replaced during the last renovation. Clara had suggested neutral art instead, something about calm tones and modern identity. I hadn't objected. I passed the nurses' station. One of them smiled. Diane, perhaps. She didn't say my name. Outside the elevator, a technician I once mentored nodded. "Mrs. Ashford. That name used to mean something here. Sometimes it still does, just not to the right people." I kept my back straight in the elevator. My hand hovered near the emergency stop button for no reason other than to anchor myself. I didn't press it. I just wanted to feel something familiar under my fingers. At the ground floor, the receptionist waved. I waved back. Small gestures, decorative like holiday centerpieces no one notices after the first minute. I made it to my car before the silence cracked. Not crying, just still. I rested both hands on the steering wheel. The sunlight hit the dashboard in a way that made the dust shimmer almost like static. My phone buzzed, a message from Thomas. "He's here." 7 N's, 3 O's. Named him Caleb. Everything went great. No photo, no mention of whether I'd like to meet him. Clara had once told me during a quiet dinner with too much candlelight and too little warmth. "It's easier when expectations are clear, Marion. Less room for hurt feelings that way." That was after she replaced the holiday dinner with a catered brunch. "Less pressure," she said. That was before the piano was moved to make space for a meditation bench. At the hospital, I'd stood in a place I helped fund with walls I'd chosen and signatures I'd gathered, and still I had to ask permission to meet my grandson. Maybe she thought I'd make it about me. Maybe she thought I'd cry. I didn't. I sat in my car and folded the phone shut, not turning it off, not replying, just folding. There's a quiet in that movement, a finality that doesn't need words. They'd prepared for the birth without me. A nursery painted in creams and sage, a curated birth playlist. Clara's sister flew in from Denver. Thomas's college friend flew in from Chicago. I'd offered to bring soup. Thomas once told me I made the best chicken soup. He was 11. He said, "Mom, yours doesn't taste like anyone else's. I haven't made it in years." Clara believes in green juices and silent mornings. She keeps a vision board by the fridge with images of lakes, almond blossoms, and two parents holding a baby. Never 3. When I first met her, she held Thomas's arm like it belonged to her, not possessively, strategically. I remember she said, "Your mother has such a presence." I hadn't replied. Thomas had wanted a quiet wedding. Clara wanted a curated guest list. They both agreed it would be too much to include distant family or close friends who wouldn't really know how to blend. I remember holding the envelope of that wedding invitation, my name printed small tucked at the end. That morning I waited outside the hospital 3 minutes longer than necessary. I looked up at the windows trying to guess which one held the room I couldn't enter. I didn't hate her. I didn't hate anyone. But I realized something standing on that pavement there is a kind of cruelty that doesn't raise its voice, that doesn't slam doors. It just quietly forgets your name. Back at home, I poured tea into a cup with a chipped rim. I didn't bother heating it fully. On the counter sat a box of books I'd planned to bring over for the baby. Titles I read to Thomas when he was small. The Snowy Day. Good Night Moon. Blueberries for Sal. I reached for a sticky note and wrote, for Caleb, from someone who still remembers what stories matter. Then I changed my mind and tossed the note. Instead, I took one of the books out and placed it on the table. Maybe I'd keep this one. Sometimes, the most honest thing you can do is hold still long enough to see what's being erased and what you're still allowed to carry. Some silences take shape before the first word is even swallowed. When the wedding invitations arrived, I opened mine with both hands, the way I once opened Thomas's report cards, gently, as if pressure might crease the news inside. My name was there printed plainly, but the names that had marked my life, the ones I had expected to see, were not. No Margaret, no Louise, not even Evelyn, who'd babysat Thomas when he had the chicken pox. Intimate is better, Clara had said over coffee one afternoon, folding a linen napkin with unnecessary precision. No offense, Marion, but not everyone fits the vision. I nodded. My tea had cooled by then. There was a chip on the rim of my cup that I hadn't noticed until that moment. Later that week, I crossed out 3 names on my own guest list and tucked the envelope away. I didn't bring it up again. I told myself that weddings were about beginnings, not corrections. When their registry went live, I scrolled through it carefully. Neutral tones, sustainable materials, nothing sentimental. I bought a hand-carved mobile made of untreated wood, something that might hang above a crib in a house with large windows and quiet rules. I never heard whether they liked it. The thank you card that arrived weeks later was typed. After the wedding, Clara asked if I wouldn't mind helping clear out the back bedroom in their new place. It just has so much of Thomas's old stuff, you know. High school trophies, yearbooks, that sort of thing. We're thinking of making it a yoga space. I sorted through boxes without gloves, brushing off ribbons from debate competitions, dog-eared books with penciled notes in the margins. I placed a shoebox full of photos into the attic without comment. The carpet smelled like cedar and something else I couldn't name. The next time I visited, the room had been painted sage green. A mat lay rolled against one wall, a Himalayan salt lamp glowing on the windowsill. None of it looked like him. None of it looked like anything. Clara once brought a salad to Sunday lunch that smelled like lemon oil and intent. I had made peach cobbler the way I used to when Thomas was a boy. Clara lifted the foil and leaned in. It smells like the 1950s. She didn't take a slice. Neither did Thomas. The cobbler sat untouched beside the salad. That night, I scraped the filling into a glass container and placed it in my fridge. 2 days later, I threw it away, unopened. For Thomas's birthday that year, I framed a photograph of him as a child, sitting on my lap with jam on his face. I chose a silver frame, matte with a thin border. Clara handed it back to me in private. He's trying to simplify his space, Marion. Fewer visual distractions. I carried it home in a reusable grocery bag. The frame chipped at one corner during the drive, but I didn't mind. I kept it on my nightstand for a while, then moved it to the drawer. When I called Thomas, I often reached Clara. He's in the middle of something. Can I tell him you called? He's just stepped out. He's prepping for a long week. I'll pass it along. Sometimes I'd try again the next day, sometimes I didn't. When he did return the calls, the pauses were longer than the sentences. I know, Mom, he said once, but Clara needs more boundaries than most people. She didn't grow up with close-knit family the way I did. I remember folding a dish towel at that moment and not unfolding it again. There was a dinner, some charity event Clara wanted to host at the house. She asked me to arrive early to help set up, but when I got there, most things had already been done. My name wasn't on the place cards. I stood near the cheese board holding a glass of something that tasted faintly of pear and distance. One of the guests, someone from Clara's yoga group, leaned over and whispered, "Are you the nanny or the housekeeper? You look so composed." I smiled. Composure is a funny thing. Sometimes it just means no one bothered to look deeper. On Mother's Day, Clara posted a photo of her mother with the caption, "To the woman who taught me everything I know about grace." There were no other photos. I spent that afternoon organizing my sewing box. I found a thimble I thought I'd lost, still warm from where it had been pressed between fabric and time. When they repainted the house, Clara chose colors called Bone Drift and Museum Dust. She painted over the mural Thomas and I had made on the garage wall when he was 8, a crooked sun, a dog that looked more like a goat, the words "we tried" in shaky block letters. She didn't mention it. I didn't ask. Once she caught me looking at it just before the painters arrived. It never really fit the aesthetic, she said, not unkindly. I drove home in silence. At a red light, I pulled a hairpin from my bun and let it rest on the dashboard. It was one of the few left from the box my mother gave me when I moved into my first apartment. The pin left a faint scratch on the plastic. I tried. I tried in casseroles, in birthday cards, in waiting to be called back. I tried in silence. I tried in acceptance. I tried in the way a person folds a coat and places it by the door they were never invited to walk through. There's a small note still taped inside my kitchen cabinet. Thomas wrote it when he was 9. It says, "Mom, you're the best cooker and the best hugger." The ink has faded into the paper now like it wants to stay. Maybe I misunderstood how things were changing. Maybe I read too much into gestures meant to be neutral. Or maybe I hoped that by being less, I would somehow be allowed more. But there's only so many times a person can rewrite their own outline before the page tears. And even then, I kept the pen capped, just in case. Some omissions don't come as cuts. They come as soft edits, erasures so small you barely feel them until something familiar is missing. Thomas's birthday had been moved to a Saturday brunch last year. Clara sent the message the night before. "If you're free, we're doing something casual. No pressure." The address was the same, but the furniture had changed. Long table, no candles. A banner that said 35 and thriving. I brought a bottle of wine, though most people held glasses of something clear and herb-infused. Someone took the wine and placed it behind the kitchen island unopened. The only seat left was by the patio door near the recycling bin. When I sat, the cushion dipped unevenly. Clara's sister waved across the room. "We didn't know you were coming." No one offered to move a chair. No one noticed when I stood for most of the cake cutting. I stayed just long enough to hand Thomas a book I'd wrapped in plain brown paper. "It's one of your old favorites," I said. He turned it over. "I don't think I read this one." I almost reminded him about the time he'd read it upside down and claimed it made more sense that way. But I let that story stay in my mouth unspoken, like a piece of fruit gone soft before its time. Clara posted pictures the next day. A perfect arch of balloons, a cake shaped like a bicycle wheel, a group photo labeled Chosen Family Only. Her parents were there, her yoga instructor, the neighbor with the golden retriever. There was no sign I had attended. I scrolled past it once, then again, just to be sure. Years earlier, I had stood at the back of the hospital auditorium during the 75th anniversary gala. I hadn't RSVP'd because Thomas said he would bring me as his guest. The room had been recarpeted. The donor wall gleamed under soft spotlights. My name was third from the top, etched in brass. Thomas stood at the podium that evening, recounting his childhood spent wandering hospital halls, dreaming of becoming a surgeon. Some people are born into opportunity, he said. Others find it. He thanked his professors. He thanked Clara for reminding me who I am. I placed my hand on the armrest of the folding chair beside me. The varnish had worn off at the edges. Afterward, I caught up to him near the exit. Clara held his elbow. "You made it," he said. I nodded. Clara leaned in. "We weren't sure you'd be comfortable in these kinds of things anymore." She straightened the collar of his jacket and tugged him gently away before I replied. "There's a chair in their dining room that used to be mine. Not officially, but always mine. Slightly taller, back, softer padding. I'd bought it myself years ago when Thomas first moved out, and I wanted him to have a place that felt solid. It had a small stain on the cushion from when he spilled cranberry sauce and tried to clean it before I noticed. Now it holds a fiddle leaf fig. Last Christmas, I brought over a pie dish I'd borrowed the year before." Clara took it with 2 fingers. "I thought we donated this already." I touched the rim before letting it go. Thomas added, "We're doing more composting now, so we're trying to cut back on leftovers. No one asked if I had eaten. I left before the coffee." A few weeks after I found a wedding invitation tucked inside a stack of mail. Not addressed to me, not even meant for me. One of Clara's college friends, I think. The envelope had been misdelivered. At the bottom, a post-it note. "Don't forward this to your mother. She takes things personally." The handwriting was familiar. I didn't keep the note, but I still remember the angle of the E. I used to write thank you cards by hand, pressing each word into cardstock with a fountain pen that left a slight feather at every loop. I still have the pen. It's in a drawer with 3 broken watches and a button from Thomas's baby cardigan. When I sleep, I sometimes dream of a porch swing. One from my childhood with iron chains that creaked just enough to let you know they could still hold weight. I remember once overhearing Clara on the phone with a friend. "She's not harmful, just a little outdated, like a story you've heard before but can't quite follow anymore." I'd been folding towels in the hallway. She had called me Mom once. The first year they were married, she had whispered it half laughing when I helped zip her dress for a charity dinner. I don't think she meant it as promise. More like a rehearsal. The last time I went over for dinner, the seat at the table had been reassigned. No explanation. Just a new rhythm to the room that no longer included where I used to be. I ate quietly, my fork never touching the plate edge. They served a kale and citrus salad. I couldn't taste the citrus. I once brought a framed picture of Thomas and me at his high school graduation. He was in cap and gown holding up 2 fingers in a peace sign. I had on a linen blouse that still smelled faintly of lavender. Clara moved the frame to a hallway table behind a scented candle. "It clashes a little with the gallery wall aesthetic," she said. I understood. I stopped bringing frames. In a family where memory becomes aesthetic, absence is curated too. Not by force, but by redecoration. Subtle, almost polite. I've learned to recognize the feeling not quite being excluded, just consistently left out of the retelling. And maybe that's worse. Because when someone rewrites the story without you, there's no scene to fight for. Just footnotes that quietly disappear. Some breaks don't echo. They land softly like a porcelain plate wrapped in cloth before it hits the floor. The envelope was heavier than usual. Not by weight, but by posture, how it leaned against the door, not quite upright, like it had something to say, but lacked the courage. It bore my name in formal script and the return address of Stoddard and Finch. I used to share coffee with Henry Stoddard on the third Wednesday of each month, back when my name still appeared in the minutes of Mercy Hill's board meetings. Inside 3 pages, 2 initials, 1 sentence that changed the outline of everything I thought still belonged to me. Your temporary absence from active oversight was interpreted as informal consent. The phrasing stayed with me. Not neglect, not resignation, just an assumption, penned in legal ink. Below, Henry had added a handwritten note. I've flagged the signature as inconsistent with previous filings. The photocopied signature floated beside mine, like a mimicry too clean, too precise, lacking the slight hesitation my hand always held before the S in Ashford. The same week I had shingles, Clara delivered muffins in a reusable bag and told me not to worry about the hospital board. Thomas has it under control. You should focus on healing, not on emails and reports. She placed a glass of water on the table without a coaster. I hadn't realized she'd also walked into my office with a stack of documents in her hand. Later, when I asked Henry for clarification, he cleared his throat. They explained that you'd given verbal consent, that you weren't well enough to sign, but had expressed trust. He paused. I imagined him looking away from the phone, pressing 2 fingers to his temple, the way he did when a case bent too far. I held it up for a week, Marion, but it came through again, this time notarized. The notary's stamp looked familiar. I had seen it on a holiday card Clara once sent from a networking brunch. Same last name. There's a new photograph in the lobby of Mercy Hill. A line of faces, Thomas smiling in a suit that fits too well, Clara to his right. A new board chair, a new set of eyes. My name isn't listed on the brass plaque beneath it. Just a gap in the chronology like the years I served were footnotes best forgotten. I stood in front of it once pretending to check my phone while a volunteer walked past with a clipboard. You must be new to the building, she said. I didn't correct her. When Thomas stopped by 2 Sundays later, he brought me a plant, a peace lily still wrapped in cellophane. We thought the transition would take pressure off you. His tie had a crease in it slightly crooked near the knot. I fixed it without thinking. You've given so much, Mom. It's time to let some of it go. He looked around my living room like he didn't recognize the furniture anymore. I pointed to the old roll-top desk where I kept the hospital's founding charter, back when we printed things on vellum and cared about margins. He followed my hand. You've done your part. Now let us carry the rest. Clara stood behind him. It's not a power grab, she said, without being asked. It's evolution. Everything modernizes. I traced the rim of my teacup. The glaze had chipped near the handle. I left it that way on purpose. It helped me remember which side to drink from. 2 days after that visit, a courier dropped off a manila folder. Inside were copies of the transfer forms. No greeting, no note. Just a receipt and the words, filed and complete. I stared at the signature for a long time. It looked like mine, but it wasn't. When I was 8, my father taught me how to sign my name with intention. He said a signature was a promise, visible proof that I stood behind something. That lesson never left me. I signed my marriage certificate with a trembling hand but a steady wrist. I signed mortgage papers, birth certificates, letters of condolence, and letters of recommendation. But I never signed away my voice. Not even silently. There was an email draft I wrote but never sent. Just 1 line. Did you think I wouldn't notice? Instead, I folded the legal letter in thirds, careful and slow, and placed it in the drawer where I keep my spare keys. It rests now between an expired passport and a theater program from the year Thomas played Mercutio. A week later, I visited the hospital on a weekday morning. I walked past the reception desk without stopping. No one looked up. The nurse at the elevator bank smiled politely. "Are you looking for someone?" I touched the pin on my coat, an enamel badge shaped like the original Mercy Hill crest. Limited edition, only given to founding donors. "I used to be," I said. Outside the boardroom, the frosted glass now reads Executive Committee, Administrative Wing. The old etching of my name has been buffed out. You can still see the faint outline if the light catches it right. I didn't speak to Thomas after that. I didn't ask for an explanation. I didn't request a meeting or a reversal. But there was something different in the way I opened the mailbox that week, as if I'd stopped expecting anything written with care. And I no longer kept a pen in my purse. Not because I didn't need one, but because I no longer wanted to be asked for a signature. Some exits don't require a door to be slammed. Only the decision to no longer stand in the doorway. The piano had gathered a soft film of dust. I traced one key with the edge of my sleeve, not to clean it, just to feel whether anything stirred. The note didn't sound. I lowered the lid slowly until it clicked shut, light as breath. A cardboard box sat beside the bench. Inside it, a framed wedding photo turned face down. I didn't wrap it in cloth. There was no need. In the hallway, the air smelled of dried eucalyptus. I'd once hung a bundle there for Clara, who said it made the house feel curated. I left the stems in place, now brittle and faded, the green long gone. I folded the gray sweater Thomas had left behind in high school. The sleeves still curled slightly inward the way his arms did when he stood beside me in church, never quite leaning, but never fully apart. I didn't pack the sweater. I placed it on the guest bed, smoothed the collar, and closed the door behind me. No farewell dinner, no family notice, no curated message about taking space. I simply left. The key went into a cream envelope. On the front, to Thomas. "Congratulations on your new family." I didn't sign it. A name would have made it personal. I set the envelope on the kitchen counter, just beside the salt jar. I had once labeled it in cursive with a small heart beneath the T. Clara replaced it with a machine-stamped font. She said it looked cleaner. The car engine hummed once, then settled. I kept the radio off. No traffic, no ceremony, just the steady rhythm of tires turning on road. The lake house greeted me the way quiet things do, without needing to be seen. It wasn't large. Cedar paneled. One floor. The same place I had spent summers with Harold before Thomas was born. I remembered the kettle that always whistled too early, and the door that stuck in the humidity. I liked that it required 2 hands to open. I unpacked slowly. A tea tin, a wool shawl, a cracked ceramic plate I couldn't part with. Each item found its place without negotiation. The phone blinked once. "Clara, where are you? Should we be worried?" I didn't reply. "Later that evening, at least tell us what this is about. You left without saying anything." There had been so many times I'd spoken and been told my timing was off, my words too loaded, my silence too expectant. This time, I kept the silence. Not to punish, but to preserve. The following morning, I opened the drawer with my old recipe cards. One was missing peach preserves in my mother's handwriting. I remembered giving it to Clara 2 years ago when she asked about family recipes that weren't too nostalgic. She never returned it. Maybe she threw it out. Maybe she filed it somewhere under quaint. No confrontation, no request. I pulled out a blank index card and wrote 2 lums, ripe peaches, 3 cups sugar juice of 1 lemon. I didn't add my name at the bottom. A letter arrived 2 days later. Cream stationery embossed initials from the hospital board. A polite acknowledgement of my absence folded in precise thirds. No mention of years served, just a single line. We appreciate your past contributions. Past. Neatly defined. I didn't call Henry. He would understand without the words. Thomas rang once. I watched the screen blink his name, then fade. An hour later, a message. You could have at least said goodbye. I read it once, then deleted it. No dramatics. No accusations. I made tea, choosing the chipped mug with the faded blue rim, the same one I used after Harold's funeral, when silence filled the kitchen like steam. In the early evening, I walked to the edge of the dock. The boards creaked beneath me, not in protest, but in memory. I sat hands resting on the wood, letting the grain press lightly into my palms. A heron passed overhead, wings stretched wide, moving without sound. I didn't turn to watch. Inside, I lit the small lamp by the bookshelf. It gave off a golden hue, the kind that didn't reach the corners but didn't need to. There was no music, only the soft shift of wind pressing against the window panes and the steady pulse behind my left ear. In the stillness, I could hear it clearly. There's something unusual about having no one ask what you plan to do next. The kettle on the stove had a dent on one side and let out a low, breathy sound when it boiled. Not a whistle, more of a sigh. I poured water into a chipped mug, watching the steam coil toward the open window where the curtain barely moved. Linen hand-stitched at the corners. I'd sewn those hems myself one spring when the lake house roof leaked and silence needed softening. The bread toasted unevenly in the oven. One edge browned too fast, curling slightly. I let it. The butter spread easier that way. No one commented on texture. No one held out a plate saying, "Is this the kind we usually get?" No one left crumbs on the counter for me to wipe. I ate slowly, not because the food demanded it, but because I could. There was no ticking clock to finish by no text message waiting to be answered with a yes or a maybe. Outside, the air still held the scent of wet leaves. I opened the front door not to step out, just to see if I wanted to. A squirrel darted across the gravel path and paused at the edge of the porch, watching me as if surprised I'd finally arrived. The wood stove groaned as it caught. I fed it one log, no more. The warmth was soft uneven, like the first cardigan I knitted after Harold passed. It never sat quite right on the shoulders, but I wore it anyway. A small, spiral-bound notebook rested on the table. Not a journal, no titles, no dates. Just a list that began things that didn't need explaining. Carrying scissors in my purse. Folding towels into thirds. The sound of tin lids when stacked quietly at night. The page curled slightly at the edge where I'd once spilled tea. I left the stain. It gave the paper weight. I heard footsteps on the porch near noon. Small ones. Quick, but not urgent. A boy no older than 7 stood with a foil-covered plate in his hand. Blonde hair, unevenly cut, one sock slipping below the ankle. He didn't knock. Just waited. I opened the door halfway. "My mom says you're new here. She made cornbread. Said it's colder by the lake." He glanced past me, eyes darting toward the stove. "She said you might not like people, but you like warm things." I took the plate, nodded once, and watched him turn back down the steps. I didn't remove the foil. I placed the plate beside the tea tin and wrote in the notebook, "Warmth offered, without reason." Later, I peeled an apple and sliced it into thin crescents. No one watched me throw away the bruised parts. No one corrected my knife angle. I arranged them in a ceramic dish I hadn't used in years. The phone lit up once that evening. "Thomas, let us know you're okay." I didn't touch it. Not out of punishment, not to cause worry, just because nothing needed answering. That night, I read a book I had once started 5 times but never finished. I got through 12 pages. Marked the spot, with a dry maple leaf I found pressed inside the back cover. No underlines, no margin notes, no one to say, "You always skip ahead." I opened the second drawer in the kitchen. Inside, one cloth napkin, a tin of safety pins, two mismatched teaspoons, a cork that didn't belong to any bottle I could remember. There was a peace in that drawer, not order, just absence of explanation. The next morning I wore socks that didn't match, gray and green. I only noticed because the green one had a looser cuff and kept sliding down. I let it be. No one would comment at breakfast. I passed the mirror once on the way to the porch. My hair had grown in uneven silvery lines around the ears. I ran a hand through it and left the strands where they fell on my shoulder. Sylvia Morton waved from across the dirt road later that day. She didn't ask where I'd come from or what had brought me here. She just lifted a basket and said, "If you need fresh eggs, the hens are friendlier this year." I wrote that down too. Kindness that didn't ask for backstory. The wind shifted in the afternoon. I moved the chair closer to the stove. Not because it was cold, but because the quiet filled more space than expected. I took the envelope Thomas had once mailed an old Christmas card unopened, found in the bottom of a drawer, and burned the flap over the stove flame. Just the flap. The rest I tucked under the woodpile. I didn't miss the weight of rings on my fingers. I hadn't worn them since I left. They sat now in a small wooden box near the kettle. Each one nestled into felt silent in its stillness. I walked by the lake before dusk. Leaves trembled, but didn't fall. The water held no reflection, just surface, just movement. Back inside, I poured the last of the tea into a cracked blue cup and watched the steam rise through the last light of day. I didn't need to ask myself how I felt. The air in my chest moved without pause. That was enough. Some messages arrive without knocking, but you still hear them loud. The kettle hadn't finished heating when the phone lit up. Not a call this time. Just a thread of older emails revived with a new line at the bottom. "Marion, if you still have the documents related to the West Parcel near Mercy Hill, could you send them along? We're trying to wrap up a zoning issue. Deadline's tight. No greeting. No mention of how I was. Not even the baby's name, which I still hadn't heard." I let the screen go dark. The kettle gave a soft breath, not a boil. I turned the knob down. By noon, Thomas's name blinked across the screen. No voicemail, just a missed call. I noted the time, 11:52, just before lunch, like a calendar reminder that needed clearing. The drawer with the land papers wasn't locked. Never had been. I opened it slowly, running one finger across the tabbed folders until I found the one labeled West Parcel, 1997 refile, yellowed at the edges. A paper clip rusted slightly at the top. I pulled it halfway out enough to see the old county seal. Then I pushed it back in. Not a gesture of refusal, just not the right time for handling deeds. I folded laundry instead. A sweater I hadn't worn in years stretched at the cuffs. I kept folding it anyway, smoothing the arms like I might wear it again, though I wouldn't. Later that afternoon, I heard the front latch click. Sylvia didn't knock, she never did anymore. She held out a small, foil-covered pie tin and said, "She made this one herself." I just stood by to make sure no eggshells went in. I recognized the handwriting on the note taped to the foil for Miss Marion. "You didn't come read. I'll write to you." I placed the pie on the counter beside the phone. Sylvia looked at it, then at me. She asked if we could frame one of your old letters, the one about the cardinals. I nodded once. After she left, I boiled water again and set a second cup beside mine. Not for drinking. Just to remember that someone had thought to bring sugar crust and blueberries unprompted. The phone buzzed again after dusk. Tom. Just checking in, any luck with the file. "No, Mom, no, are you okay?" I placed the phone face down. On the shelf above the stove sat a chipped ceramic duck that Harold had bought at a church auction. No use for it, no story behind it. He liked the shape, or maybe the way it tilted forward, as if just about to move, but never did. I dusted it with the edge of my sleeve and turned it slightly to face the window. The frost came in early that evening. I lit the stove again, fed it 2 logs this time. Not for warmth, I was layered enough, but for the sound, the rhythm. In the quiet between logs catching, I could still hear Clara's voice from some winter past. It's not personal, Marion. It's just cleaner when we handle these things ourselves. Cleaner. The pie sat untouched for a while. I didn't want it warm. I wanted it quiet, just as it had arrived. There was a letter opener in the drawer with the old land maps. Ivory handle dulled from years of paper envelopes and never any packages. I used it to lift the foil gently. No eggshells. Crust golden and imperfect. I cut a piece. Small. Just the corner. As I chewed, I remembered a dinner long ago, where Clara had pushed aside the bread pudding I'd made and murmured to Thomas. She always overdoes the nutmeg. I never used nutmeg again. The taste now was simple. Sweet. Blueberries, not dialogue. The next morning I pulled the file out again. This time all the way. The map inside had a coffee ring on it. That day had been long. I'd signed so many dotted lines for Harold back then, hands shaking not from age, but from what no one told me was grief. There was a note I'd written to myself on the margin. Don't forget the soil here sinks near the south line. A small thing, but I remembered writing it. I blew gently on the page, and the dust lifted, hovering for a second, before settling somewhere I couldn't see. Then I closed the file again, not for revenge, not for permission, just because I'd remembered something worth keeping. The email stayed unread. The missed call unreturned. The pie half-eaten. The duck still watching the window. Nothing needed explaining that day, and nothing needed to be sent. Some things only begin to grow after everything else has been stripped away. I noticed the callus on the side of my ring finger was gone. The one formed from decades of signing checks, notes, forms always handed to me without pause, as if my consent were ceremonial. Now the paper sits still unless I choose to lift it. Thursdays are for the library. I arrive before the doors open, not out of duty, but rhythm. The children's corner smells like glue and something citrusy from their snack packs. I choose books with wide margins and quiet endings. A boy named Milo leaned in once mid-sentence and whispered, "You read like you don't mind waiting." I nodded. No one asked me to read slower. He just noticed. I wear a faded denim jacket now. The inside pocket holds a linen napkin folded into fourths. I use it to wrap the cookies they offer, then tuck them into my coat like small promises saved for later. Sylvia came by with 24 eggs. "The pale ones are sweeter," she said. I handed her the corrected ledgers. Her husband had tracked feed costs on the backs of sermon programs. I organized them into columns labeled plainly oat hay loss prayer. In my garden, the carrots are beginning to split the earth. I pull them one by one, not because I need them, but to see the small victories that happen underground. Kale grows bitter if you wait too long. I clip only what I'll eat by dusk. A letter came cream envelope, gold trim. Spring banquet honoring all mothers. I left it on the counter beside the cracked sugar jar. 2 days later, I replied on ruled paper, "Thank you. I'm honoring silence this season." No signature flourish, just my name. Last week, a former parishioner called. "We're organizing a legacy fund. Thought of you. You've always known how to read the fine print." I let the silence rest. Then I answered, "That's why I don't sign much anymore." He cleared his throat. I let him. Sometimes I polish the silver, not for guests, not for tradition, just to know what remains when no one expects anything of you. I chose one spoon delicate, slightly bent, as if it had once borne more than its share. I wrapped it in tissue and placed it in a box for Audrey's birthday. She stirs her tea carefully, like grown-ups do. The phone vibrated 3 times last Friday. Thomas. I didn't open it. Just turned the screen down, placed my hand over it. The lavender on the windowsill had browned. I had meant to trim it days ago. Out back, the air was cooler. I took the scissors to the bush near the shed, not to harvest, but to make space. Some stems I left wild. Some I brought in, arranged loosely in the same jar. No symmetry, just what fit. There's a ledger I keep now, not of debts, but verbs. A small brown notebook where I write what I do not what I owe. Fold, steep, decline, mend, withhold, begin. I added give after boxing 2 scarves and a pressed flower book for a library fundraiser. Not because they weren't useful, because holding them no longer made me still. A neighbor girl stopped by on her scooter, handed me a card with 2 uneven hearts and the words, "You are library," that was all. I taped it inside the pantry door. Above it, I pinned a grocery list with only 3 items: tea matches, oranges. The cracked mirror in the hallway still slants. I never replaced it. I've learned to stand slightly off-center. The fracture doesn't show if you know where to look. Most days, I don't look straight on. This morning, I set out 3 forks instead of 1. Not for guests. Just to remind myself that I still can. There was a time I waited for someone to say, "Come join us." Now I arrange the table before light touches the sink. Once, after a hospital board meeting, Thomas adjusted his tie and said, "You're too thorough, Mom." People don't want the whole story, just the results. I remember nodding. I remember holding the minutes of that meeting as if they could fold into something smaller. I no longer fold. Someone at the post office asked if I wanted to volunteer for the community picnic. "You're reliable," she said. "I'm restoring," I answered. She blinked, then smiled, not quite sure what I meant. I found an old photograph last night slipped behind a drawer. My hand was on Thomas's shoulder. His smile looked real. I didn't put it on the fridge. I didn't tear it up. I slid it into the back of the drawer and shut it. The lavender on the table dried into a pale gray. I kept it. Not everything fragrant needs to be fresh. Once, I believed my usefulness was the same as my worth. Now I believe in quiet utility, like an extra set of mittens in the drawer there if needed, but not displayed. I still receive emails with my name in bold. Some start with, "Just checking in," and end with a favor. I don't reply the same day. Sometimes I don't reply at all. This is not anger. It is space. The wind carried the smell of burning leaves this evening. I closed the window halfway, not to block it, but to let just enough in. I used to think closure needed a conversation. The envelope I held had no return address, only a simple wax seal. I pressed myself, uneven and faint, just an M from an old monogram stamp tucked away in my sewing kit. I placed it on the table in front of Henry without comment. He understood. Lawyers often do, especially the old ones who've seen families come together with velvet words and split apart with notarized ink. I didn't sit down. Instead, I watched the reflection of the morning sun on the polished edge of his bookshelf. There was a brass duck bookend I remembered from my husband's time. It hadn't moved. Some things stay. Others fade gently, like breath on glass. Inside the envelope, a revised will, a medical directive, and a letter I'd rewritten 6 times, but still left mostly blank. Sylvia Morton was now listed as the emergency contact. I'd asked her first. She'd brought over soup that week and a bundle of lavender tied with butcher's twine. Only if you don't mind my name on such a serious piece of paper, she'd said. I didn't mind. Thomas and Clara's names had been removed, not crossed out, deleted. The space where they used to be now held a different intention, a community scholarship fund for early literacy administered quietly through the public library. I had written in small letters, to help children find words no one silences. Henry read in silence. I watched his thumb run across the page, pause slightly on the new beneficiary line. He didn't flinch. They might contest, he finally murmured. I folded my scarf into my purse. Let them. He didn't ask why. That's the reason I chose him. At the post office, I handed over a smaller envelope addressed to Thomas. Inside, the gold bracelet from his 8th birthday, the one with my initials etched inside. It had always slipped slightly on his wrist. I'd kept it wrapped in tissue and placed it in a plain box. No card, no explanation. The clerk offered tracking. I declined. I didn't want to know where it landed. Back home, I sat by the mailbox, the old one by the gate, that still bore the faint shape of the brass letters, M. Ashford. My father-in-law had nailed them in by hand. I took a flathead screwdriver and loosened them one by one. The metal had sunk deep over time like habits. I replaced it with a piece of sanded pine etched by hand, Little Free Library, take one, leave one. It had taken me 2 evenings to carve, and the R still looked like a crooked fishhook. But it was mine. The first book I placed inside was Charlotte's Web. The inside cover still bore a note in my mother's handwriting. To Marion, for when you feel alone. The right words will find you. Later that evening, I walked back to the lake with a folded lawn chair and a flask of tea. The sky was already leaning toward blue-gray, and the cattails stood like quiet guards at the shore. A text buzzed on my phone, short and clipped. Thomas, received something from you. Wasn't expecting that. Another message came a moment later. Do you want to talk? I stared at the screen until it dimmed. I didn't type anything. A dragonfly landed on my knee and paused as if considering me. Its wings were veined like the glass on my grandmother's jewelry box. I didn't move. At the edge of the water, I unfolded a slip of paper and read my own handwriting again. Family is not always the one you're born into. Sometimes it's the one that never asks you to disappear. The act of folding it back into its envelope felt final, not dramatic, not triumphant. Just complete. Like the last button on a cardigan you hadn't worn in years slipping into place with a click soft enough only you would notice. When I returned inside, I looked around for something to do. The kettle was already warm. The soup had been eaten. I found myself picking up the silver polish, rubbing gently at a sugar spoon that had belonged to my mother-in-law. Not to use, just to return it to brightness one quiet circle at a time. There's a difference between absence and erasure. One fades with time. The other must be chosen deliberately, painfully, like pruning a tree so the light can reach the roots. I hadn't burned bridges. I had let them sink under their own weight. I tucked the envelope with the revised will into the back of the drawer next to the lavender sachets. The drawer clicked shut with a sound that reminded me of final pages in books too well loved to be shelved again. Some people need closure. Others build silence into something solid enough to live inside. I don't need applause to know I'm still here. The cup of peppermint tea warms my fingers through the glaze of the old ceramic. There's a hairline crack on the side. I always tilt the rim, so my lips don't touch it. I used to have a full set, now just this one. It's never felt like less. The morning light shifts behind the linen curtain, casting soft squares onto the kitchen table. One lands on the spine of the paperback I've left open for 3 days, face down. I haven't been reading, but the pages keep breathing curled at the edges like a slow inhale. There's rosemary in a clay pot on the sill. I brush my fingertips across the leaves every morning. I don't use it for cooking. I just like the way it smells when touched. The drawer to my right holds a bundle of old letters tied with coarse twine. I didn't read them again. I didn't burn them. I just gathered them into order, my own order, and tucked them away. That was enough. Theo came in again today. He didn't ask. He never does. He's just there now, like the kettle, or the sunlight, or the floorboards that creak near the door. He pauses beside the cupboard, as if remembering who he used to be. I let him be. I wiped down the photo frame, just the one left in the house. Me, sitting with 3 children from the library reading group, all of us laughing. I don't recall what was so funny that day. Only that I looked up afterward and no one was correcting me. The envelope came in just past noon. Clara's name, sharp and centered in the inbox. I've been meaning to write. I regret how things unfolded. I hope you're well. I read it once. Didn't answer. Didn't delete it. I clicked mark as read, then closed the screen. The words felt like folded linen, neat, impersonal, never meant to be worn. A squirrel knocked something off the ledge outside. I didn't flinch. I folded a dish towel instead. Sylvia's daughter had drawn me a picture of a house with a yellow roof and a sign that said, "Books live here." She'd slipped it under my front door with a single pink crayon rubber banded around the bottom like a gift. I put it on the fridge. At the market, someone tapped me on the shoulder and asked if I was the lady who read the stories. The one with the lavender voice, she said. I nodded. She smiled and didn't need more. The sweater I wear most now is the one with the loose threads near the cuffs. It smells faintly of cedar and is missing a button near the hem. I patched it once with thread that didn't quite match. I've grown fond of the unevenness. I haven't touched the piano. I walked past it in a thrift shop last week. The keys were slightly yellowed, like teeth too old for vanity. I rested my hand on the cover, then walked on. The rosemary needed trimming. I didn't. I let it keep growing unruly and fragrant, spilling past the edge of its pot, like it didn't believe in containers anymore. Theo curled up on the chair beside me, one paw hanging over the side tail, twitching. I watched the rise and fall of his breathing. Nothing in this room demanded anything from me. That felt like ownership. The envelope with Thomas's bracelet was never returned. No response, no acknowledgement. I had imagined it would come back unopened or with a note. It didn't. It disappeared as some things do when they find their end quietly. I began organizing the library box again. Someone had left a copy of Charlotte's Web. Inside on the title page, a child had scribbled, "For whoever needs a friend who listens." I taped the page gently. Words don't need to be perfect to last. The sun moved across the floor, slowly crawling up the side of the cupboard until it reached the rosemary. I sat still and let it reach me too. I didn't expect silence to be this loud, but it isn't empty. It's just wide. The picture frame shifted slightly on the table when I leaned forward to pour more tea. I steadied it with one finger. The children's smiles didn't blur. The window faces east. Mornings come early here. They stretch long and pale and say nothing. I still get mail. Mostly flyers, local newsletters, a card from a woman named Doris who thinks I'm someone named Edith. I never correct her. A knock came once from someone collecting signatures. He looked at me, then at the garden. "Don't worry about it," he said, handing me a brochure. "You've done enough already." He didn't stay for tea. I repotted a plant last Sunday. The dirt smelled like memory, but softer. There's a rhythm now. Tea. Window. Cat. Wind. Page. A whole world in fewer syllables. Clara's email remains in the archive. Not unread, not answered. Just there. Like a scar beneath fabric. The library children left a thank you card taped to the mailbox. You make quiet feel safe, it read. I folded it and placed it beside the letters I haven't reread. I didn't need to write back. I didn't need to explain. I didn't need to prove I was still a mother or still a woman who once had a title. I didn't need to be called back. I poured the last of the tea, lifted the curtain, and opened the window. The air was brisk. It smelled of leaves and loam and something older than apology. I closed the laptop. Let the email stay behind the screen. The book still lay open, its spine soft from use. I turned the page and didn't look back.